Have you ever found yourself in a very dangerous or potentially deadly situation, suddenly solved by a friend or a total stranger with apparently no effort? I worked as a chef in a very nice restaurant in Cleveland, Ohio in the mid-1980s. It was located near a very bad neighborhood, and some of our dishwashers lived in that neighborhood. I was a young, white kid from the suburbs, and one of the dishwashers was a black man in his late 30s named Harold, who went by Hurl, no idea why. Anyway, Hurl and I became friends. He was a rather jovial guy, and he was interested in cooking, so I taught him a few things, and eventually got him promoted from dishwasher to cook. He was actually quite good, and loved the new job, and me for helping him out. One day he asked me if I wanted to go out and partying with him after work. Being young and adventurous, I took him up on his offer, and into the neighborhood we went. For those of you familiar with Cleveland, it was the Hoff Avenue neighborhood. We eventually ended up in an after-hours club, which is where all the drunk people ended up when the bars all closed. I was wandering around a smoke-filled room with lots of very seedy-looking people, and I was quite drunk at the time. I ended up in a corner somewhere, surrounded by a small gang of people wondering who I was. They started closing in on me, and one of them asked me if I had $1 I could give him. I felt my skin get clammy, and realized I was about to get jacked by some drunk guys in a bad neighborhood. Suddenly Hurl shows up, looks at the guy asking me for $1 and says, "He with me." Hurl has a look on his face I have never seen before, a lot more menacing than anyone in the gang surrounding me. The gang immediately changes their tune, and suddenly I am their friend, and one of them asks me if I would like a beer, and offers me the one he has been drinking. I respectfully decline, and Hurl and I move away. Hurl looks at me, still with that menacing look, and says, "Anyone comes up to you in this hood, you tell them you with Hurl. They know me, and they know I don't play." Good to know. Another chef-related story. My mother and father used to own a restaurant in San Francisco. It was south of Market at a time when that was an exceptionally bad area. They hired this really nice Mexican guy Juan to wash dishes and do work in the kitchen. They were, however, down a chef, the previous one quite all of a sudden, and hired this new guy on short notice. So it's the first day. The restaurant starts to fill up for lunch at around 11:30 or so. Normally a number of dishes would be prepped for the first few people coming in for lunch. But this guy, in spite of his frantic running around the kitchen, had nothing ready. So my mother walks into the kitchen and says, "Hey, what's the deal?" The guy tells her, aggressively, that he's getting the stuff ready. Wait another 40 minutes, still no one had gotten their meals. My mother walks back into the kitchen and this guy reels around with a butcher knife, walks up to her, and waves it in her face saying, "Get the fuck out of my kitchen!" The next thing, Juan, who'd been watching this exchange, bends down to his boot and pulls out a carving knife, grabs the chef by the throat and pushes his up against the stove. The guy drops the butcher knife and pretty much shits himself. He then runs out of the restaurant swearing everyone to hell. My mother, after crying for a few minutes, realizes that she's screwed because she has no one to cook lunches for the 70 or so people waiting. Juan says, "Do not worry," puts on an apron and cooks up all the lunches with lightning speed, and they were great lunches. I had one of them. The chef came back a few weeks later apologizing. He said he had a really bad coke habit that he was now dealing with. Juan was employed from that day on as head chef. Good old Juan, total BMF. I was doing a show at this wretched comedy club in Brockton, Massachusetts. There was a drunk chick who would not stop talking, so after a few polite back and forths, I say something along the lines of, "Will someone stick a dick in her mouth and shut her up?" Note, this is an old, lame thing to say, but it usually works. That does the trick and she's quiet the rest of the show. I finish my set and come off stage. I'm walking out to the front room of the club, and I'm suddenly aware of an enormous shape coming towards me. It's the hosebag's boyfriend. He's got like 8 inches and 100 pounds on me, and he's pissed. He shoves me into the front room and is doing the whole pre-fight. "Why you talking about my girl that way?" chest bumped kind of thing when suddenly 3 dudes just kind of sweep into the room. They're all built like fireplugs and wearing matching skin-tight Adidas workout shirts like some kind of working-class superhero team. One of them closes the doors to the showroom and blocks them. Another goes and stands by the front door, like he's standing guard or something, while the third gets between me and the big dude, who says, "What the fuck, man? You want to fight?" And the guy says in the calmest, coldest voice, "Yes. I do. Let's fight." Something in the way he says it totally takes the steam out of the big dude. He just backs right down, like, "No, man. It's cool. We're all cool here." And then my mean little savior goes, "This guy was hilarious. Your girlfriend's a cunt, and you owe him an apology and a beer." And the big guy nods and goes and gets me a beer before going back into the show with his tail between his legs. Turns out these guys were off-duty Brockton vice cops. Totally saved my stupid ass. How about a non-human stranger? I was about 8 or 9 walking home from school. About a block from my house, some random pit bull runs up to me and starts growling. Scared the shit out of me. I figure I am at death's door, when out of nowhere another dog came to my aid. I believe it was a German Shepherd. This dog ran to my side and started barking at the pit bull until it left. I didn't know this dog, and I don't believe I ever saw him or again. It was a pretty surreal situation. Dude, that was your Patronus. You owe that dog a treat. You owe that dog a ride with the windows rolled down. I got cornered for a beating in a new high school, surrounded by about 20 kids. This one kid who I met a day earlier casually walked along a fence rail through the crowd and swiftly kicked the lead kid in the face. End of story. Saved me from a beating. Never got to thank him. This was in Karachi, Pakistan in the late 90s. We were at my uncle's place, who was renovating his house. He had a small cement mixer set up behind the house which was taking up some of the alley. Usually, when someone is building a house, the cops will show up and say the mixer is illegal and ask for a bribe to turn a blind eye. Problem is, on this particular day, pretty much all the cops started showing up one by one. Each one would say, "Pay us and nothing else will bother you." And a few minutes later a new police van would show up saying the same thing. We had enough and stopped paying him. This pissed off one of the cop vans, and a couple of officers showed up at our door. We kids opened it, and the officer asked us to come with him. He took us to the end of the alley where 5 to 6 cops were standing, AK-47s drawn. We all shat bricks while the officer kept saying, "Why won't your parents pay? Why won't your parents pay?" Things were not looking good. Luckily, one of our neighbors saw the cops rounding up the kids and walking us away. He was a big shot in a major gang. He left his house, got on his motorbike and drove over to where we were stood. Told the cop, "Let them go, if you know what's good for you." The cops left. Noon bothered us again until the construction was done. Edit. Another Karachi story in the same vein. Every now and then, there is a general strike in Karachi which is enforced by local gangs. By enforced, that means they'll gun down anybody who leaves their houses. It's not always that bad, but this is the threat. During one of these strikes, my uncle's aunt, not the same uncle as the last story, fell sick and had to be taken to the hospital, which was right around the corner from my uncle's place. You could walk to it. My uncle was at the hospital all day looking after her, and decided to head home in the afternoon. Streets were deserted and he made haste. When he was literally 20 meters from his home, a gang of bikers saw him, chased and cornered him. They asked him why he was out during the strike, and he tried explaining. They'd have none of it. They had their weapons leveled at him while he backed up against the gate to his neighbor's home. He banged at their metal gate for help, but who the hell would come out in that situation? Suddenly, a car drives by. Black, with tinted windows. A window rolls down and says, "Let this one go." Bikers left. Uncle sprinted for his house, got in, and started shaking uncontrollably. And that is how we found him, and he told us this story. A guy who was harassing me in a bar got ejected. I learned he waited outside to attack me. Another patron apparently witnessed what went on in the bar, saw the guy laying for me, and sucker punched him. Maybe he was waiting to apologize to you properly. This is a friend story, but I was there and saw it take place. I only saw the second half of the story take place. This took place in the late 80s. This girl, a super pretty black girl who had worked her way out of the ghetto and into the middle class, was walking home from work one day, a mile from her home. A car pulled up with 2 gang girls. They proceeded to rob this girl of everything she had and left her naked alongside the road. Literally. Naked. Nobody will help her. She is supremely embarrassed. Finally, some guy gives her a jacket, and she calls the cops. They show up, treat her like shit, but give her a ride home. She gets home to find her home has been robbed, stripped clean by the 2 girls who had her address from her driver's license, and her house keys from her purse. TV gone. Clothes gone. Even her kitchen stuff gone. The cops leave making a crack about how she was probably robbed by somebody she knew. They weren't going to do a thing. My friend is hysterical, crying. She thinks of all the people she knew who could help her in some way. Someone who could make the cops pay attention. Someone who could get her stuff back. She calls Jim Brown. That's right, legendary pro football player, Hollywood actor, black icon and all-around badass, ass kicker. She tells him the story. He says he will take care of it. She asks what he is going to do, but he just tells her not to worry. A few hours later a truck pulls up to her home. A few guys get out, open the door and unload everything that was stolen from her. Everything. Jim Brown, one badass motherfucker. I was at Pismo Beach in California, about 13 years old at the time, boogie boarding and not really paying attention to the fact that the current had been pushing me closer and closer to the pier. I guess I figured when I started getting too close I would just easily swim away and that would be that. When I finally realized that I was going to be slammed into the mussel and fishing hook encrusted pillars soon if I didn't start moving away, I began to swim the opposite direction. This is when I realized that swimming against the current is much harder than swimming with it. I started paddling furiously, and then began panicking because I wasn't making any progress. With each wave I was being pushed closer to the pier. It would be just a couple more cycles before I started bouncing around underneath the pier. That's when I noticed a man standing in the water next to me. It was about waist deep. Feeling like an idiot, I slid off my board, stood up, and walked to shore. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.